During the holy nights of Ramadan, here in Kuwait we have a custom. We go and visit different diwaniyas and houses to congratulate each other for the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan. Tonight we are here, the house and the diwaniya of the late Mr. محمد قبازرد, who documented Kuwait history on films, whereby the best one to talk about his life, his eldest son, Mr. Jاسم قبازرد. Mr. Jاسم محمد قبازرد, for the holy month of Ramadan, I would like to tell him Barak alak Shah.
Alayna wa alayk, thank you.
Now let's talk about your late father, Mr. Muhammad قبازرد. He was one of the pioneers who filmed Kuwait, and also he was a director, a cameraman, announcer, and an editor. But first of all, let's start about his birthday. Can you tell us the date and the place where he was born?
Yes, my late father, may he rest in peace, was born in Kuwait in 1918 in the area of Al-Qibla. And he got married in 1945. He had 5 boys and 1 girl. I am the eldest, and my sister is the youngest. He passed away in June 1987 in Kuwait.
And when he was born 1918, then he had to have some kind of jobs. Can you tell us about the job promotion that he had continuing his life?
Among his brothers, his elder brothers, they were all involved in the work at sea, pearl diving, merchants. They were merchants of the sea. So they were concerned about the education of their younger brother, who's my father. So they paid a lot of attention from that point of view, and they had him go to private schools in Kuwait, and they let him concentrate on improving his education.
Do you remember those private schools? I mean, the names?
It was a private school. I don't recall the name, but it was in the 1920s, and one of his teachers, a well-known teacher at the time, was his name, Mr. Mirza Hassan al-Shirazi. He was a well-known scholar who taught Arabic language and in grammar in particular. And then later on in his teenage years, he went to school, again a private school, headed by Sayyid Omar.
I think he was learning English in those days.
Yes, Sayyid Omar was the person who taught them the English language, and Sayyid Omar Azmiri, his name is well known, and he also taught him Turkish language. So he learned the Turkish language and the Arabic and the English at his early ages of education in Kuwait until he was about 16, 17 years old.
He also spoke other languages besides this?
Yes, later on in his life, he actually, on his own, with the help of some people who could speak the French language. I remember he used to come at home and give him courses in the French language. Some of them was in writing, some of them was on tapes and on the old phonograph plates which they used to use, or let's say. So these were the methods which he was using to learn the English and the French language. Later on, I remember he also learned Russian. So he tutored himself, actually, Russian language. And he also picked up Urdu from his brothers while they were at sea sometimes, and during his work while he was at the Kuwait Port Authority.
Because Urdu was very essential in those days to communicate with India, exactly, which we had a great trade with them in those days.
Exactly. Of course, he also managed to improve on his Persian language. And in all these languages, I remember he paid a lot of attention on educating himself by reading, communicating with friends, with people who spoke the language, and through his travels later on while he was touring the world during his elder years.
In his early age, he had a job with the customs. Yes. And can you tell us how did he get this job and what was his position?
Yes. The reason why he started early, he was 16 years old when he started his first work at the Kuwait Port Authority. At the time, it used to be called, it was a company actually. It was called the Kuwait Company for Transport and Stevedoring. The fact that he could speak English well at that early age, and English spoken was very limited at the time, he was working in that authority, and soon that company was nationalized, and it was called the Kuwait Ports Administration, and he was appointed the general director of the Kuwait Ports
And that went from
Administration.
which year to which year?
This was from the 1952 until the 1961-62. During that time, Kuwait was very active in its ports and connections, and it was developing its trade business. So the port was a vital location, a gateway to the world, knowing that the Kuwaitis were very good merchants of the sea and very good seamen. So that was the most active and most vital business center, call it, for Kuwaitis to be employed and work and learn the business of commerce. And also it was a gateway with the outside world through the shipping agencies and through the shipping traffic at the time. So during those years, he further developed his language vocabulary with the different nationalities which he was dealing with. So he was actually learning it as a hobby and was using it to improve his communications with the outside world.
But why in those early days he had to learn English? I mean, those days Kuwaitis were not really eager to learn English. But what happened that made him to go and study English?
One thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that his brothers were, let's say, encouraging him to do so.
Because of India?
Because generally that they were not very well educated themselves. They were hard workers, like many Kuwaitis at the time. At an early age, they had to go and work and make a living because of the hardships of the times. So they thought it's better for the younger brother to have a better education and a better chance. So that was one major drive for them to let him do this work. The other one was his own personal liking to this type of development of his own talents, let's call it. I remember from his friends, older friends, they used to say that he was a workaholic, for one thing. He liked to work a lot, and he enjoyed reading. So wherever there were books available, he used to go there and read as much as he could to educate himself. Some friends, some old friends of his, had actually small libraries within their homes. And once he was invited and he knew about these locations, he would go and spend hours in these homes. And sometimes they had to really ask him to leave because he was so much involved in educating himself and reading. So the English language, obviously, at the time was a prime means of communicating with the international world, and obviously with his position, not only he had to communicate in the types of letters and telegrams which coming in and out of Kuwait, but there were also experts. And I remember there were a group of experts from Scotland who were at the administration, the ports administration, to act as advisors and give guidance to the different departments and to develop the actually administration to an efficiency that could match and co-op with the international world. So it was partly his own will and wish to learn, and secondly, the fact that he was port general director, he had to learn this language to be able to communicate.
Now we reach until the year 1961 when Kuwait took their independence. And now what happened to him after 1961?
At that time, the different departments of Kuwait and the different ministries were beginning to get established because of the independence of Kuwait. And he also at the same time resigned from his post because he was involved in his own private work at the time. And Kuwait was booming, it was developing, it was expanding. And many of the merchants of Kuwait who worked in these organizations went into the private sector to pursue their future. At the same time, the fact that he was involved in his work, he was also appointed as a board member of the Kuwait Petroleum Company in the early 60s. He was also a member of Kuwait Friendship Mission, which was created immediately after the independence of Kuwait in 1960-61, to go to the Near East and Far East to tell the world about Kuwait and the policies of Kuwait, and to make Kuwait known to the international community. So this was a first exposure for him to travel abroad, officially representing Kuwait with a group of other well-known figures. He was also given the authority to represent Kuwait in an international conference in London. It was on safety at sea. So the fact that he was the Director General, he represented Kuwait in this large conference where we have it all documented on film because he took his camera with him there, and he actually was involved in signing any kind of international agreements on behalf of Kuwait for the safety at seas around the world. Soon after that, the Constitution of Kuwait was written, and the first general elections in Kuwait was proceeded with in 1963, for the National Assembly, and he went into politics at that time, and he was a candidate, and he actually did get elected in the first group of members of Parliament of Kuwait in 1963.
اهتفوا قولوا معايا بشرى بيمنا الجديد يا سلام الفجر
جرى بعد ذلك انتخاب مجلس الأمة وفقا للدستور، وكان إقبال المواطنين شديدا دل على مدى وعيهم وتفهمهم المسؤولية النيابية.
اهتفوا قولوا معايا بشرى بيمنا الجديد يا سلام الفجر اهتفوا قولوا معايا بشرى بيمنا الجديد يا سلام الفجر السعيد والأمل معقود بالعهد الجديد حقق الآمال بالرأي السديد أكملنا الاستقلال والنصر المجيد بان بأيام السعيدة يا سلام من فجر نور يا كويت اليوم أبطالك جنودك شعبك الصنديد يرفع لك بنودك يا كويت اليوم أبطالك جنودك وشعبك الصنديد يرفع لك بنودك خالق الأكوان يحمي لك أسودك يا أميرنا ندعي للمولى يصونك بان بأيام السعيدة يا سلام من فجرنا.
Then after that?
Obviously after that he was out of politics, and he maintained always his likeness into pursuing the photography as a hobby, actually, and developed very well with him. And he was among the very, very few photographers in Kuwait. Perhaps he was the only one who had such a likeness to pursue this art, you want to call it, on a very intensive manner. He started taking films first with the still camera in the early 40s, actually. We had some films that he had taken using a Polaroid camera. So we did not realize that Polaroid was in Kuwait at such an early age, but he actually had a camera, which was a Polaroid camera. So every time there was a development in a camera, he would quickly buy it and try to learn how to work with it. And I remember when we were young at the time, he was very much interested in how the mechanics of a camera worked. He used to read about it, talk to captains in the sea, talk to captains in the airplane about many technical things that had to do with angles, with height, with speed, with light, like the shutter speed and the film, quality of the film, and how these systems work together to get a good picture. So he was continuously searching for more knowledge, and he would grasp any opportunity with any person to learn more and to strengthen his knowledge. It seems to me that he was always questioning things around him. He wanted to see how things worked, how things were happening. So at any opportunity he met with someone with some authority, whether it was a religious person, had to do with religion, or had to do with politics, or with economics, or with science, you'd immediately find out that he asked him a question. It seemed that he was interested to find some answers. Through this eagerness to develop his knowledge, later on we found out that he accumulated a large vocabulary of information, a large library of information inside him from many different aspects, in history, in geography, in science, and in religion. Through the photography, he actually strengthened his knowledge of sciences and of religion and history, because as the world started to get smaller, where air traffic became more common, he used to travel a lot. All during summer vacations, he used to travel for periods of 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and take his camera with him and bring to Kuwait back after each vacation hundreds and thousands of footage of films it has taken, and he would show it to his friends. I remember at the same time that movie camera and projection was very limited. He had actually bought a projection camera, and a friend of his, Sheikh Jabir Abdullah al-Jabir al-Sabah, who was, again, another eager person in Kuwait in filmmaking and interested in the cinema talents, let's call it. They were both rivals. They were both trying to help each other and also exchange some of the films that used to come to Kuwait. So my father used to have a film show at his home, open to the public many times, and sometimes private friends. And they'd bring films that used to come to Kuwait, to KOC, for instance. They would see it, and then would bring these films to our home and show it to his friends. He actually followed the sequence of the development of filmmaking. First he started with still cameras, and then as soon as cine cameras came into the Kuwait market, he obtained these cameras from Kuwait. I believe the first one he obtained was from Europe, actually, in one of his trips. He bought the camera from there. He brought it to Kuwait.
Do you remember who was the first shop they sold those kind of cameras?
I remember that we used to go to a shop in Bond Street in England. I don't recall now the name, but I think the shop is still there. That was the place where he bought his first camera.
1950?
1950, actually 1948, 50. And
How do you get to London? I mean, the trip.
Yes, he used to take these propeller planes, and used to take 13, 14 hours to get there. He had to make maybe 10 or 15 stops on the way, very short trips. The first camera which he was using was a black and white films. There were no color films yet in the market. And they were still camera. There was no sound. It was just black and white moving camera, cine camera. He shot about his friends and deserts of Kuwait, architecture of Kuwait, certain events that were happening, certain guests of Kuwait who used to come. He would record that on film. Then he was also using the 16mm film at the time. These films had to be developed outside of Kuwait. He used to send the package back to the United Kingdom, at the time Great Britain, and wait for about 2-3 weeks for these packages to come back. That was the most difficult part for him, because he had no idea if these films would come back all with proper pictures, you know, the zoom is right, the light is right, the movement is okay, or some of the films would come back with some of the mistakes in his photography. So you can imagine he lost a lot of good shots during the learning curve which he was doing. But every time he learned better about how to use his camera, and he was using more film, and finally he started to make less mistakes and get more efficiency out of his filmmaking.
So he learned by trial and error.
By trial and error.
He corrected himself all the time.
Exactly.
To become.
At those times, there were no automatic systems. It was all manual. That's why he was so interested to know how the camera works. How does the lens work? How does the light system works? And when in 1950, I believe, the color film started to come to the market, he then shifted from black and white and started shooting color films.
Mr. Jاسم Qbazrd, let's talk about the movie that your father produced about Kuwait. And I remember when I watched that movie, it's when the late Sheikh Ahmed al-Jabir, he was the ruler of Kuwait, when he passed away, and they have to move his tomb from Desman into the graveyard. And it was in color. And
yes.
Can you tell us more about this? And how did he make the shots and everything?
Yes, the film actually speaks for itself. He, being a keen photographer at the time, was interested to record this on film, because shooting film at those age, at that time, was almost like a taboo. You wouldn't get near it. And people are very hesitant to shoot films or to be recorded on film. So I believe at the time he foresaw something important about recording this on film, and the fact that people knew him, and he was a man of well-known stature at the time. I believe he felt that he is safe in taking films without anybody getting, let's say, aggravated by this. You can imagine where everybody is in mourning, and filmmaking at the time was a taboo. It wouldn't look right. Someone at this time that instead of sharing the sadness of the occasion, instead being involved in taking pictures of people. So it was like an adventure at the time. But thank God
he documented this
he
era.
managed to actually document this. The interesting part is that he was aware of taking multiple shots from different angles. I believe now if you see these films, you can appreciate that he was not only interested in taking an event from a certain point of view, but he was actually moving around, taking small shots, wide shots, narrow shots, going on top of buildings. He actually went on top of one of the buildings and shot the crowds as they were moving. And he was quite aware of how the light should be, and the light and shadow, how it should be structured into the frame of the picture. I remember this personally, that he was always trying to be in a position where the sun is from behind him, for instance, or shoot at the time where there's enough light and enough shadow to show the contrast.
He didn't make any night shots.
He actually started. He took a lot of films, night shots through sunrise. Flash came very late stage, but he used to obtain very sensitive lenses, try to catch as much light at night, or these night shots. And through trial and error, finally he managed to get a lot of night shots. And during his film recording, he actually managed to go inside some of the buildings. And he had a good sense about enough light to shoot these shots. So he was, for instance, in palaces, in castles, in museums, and in some underground train tube stations, which had very beautiful decoration, like in Russia, for instance. So he actually, through trial and error, managed to get a sense of confidence. You can imagine, you go only one trip, and you have one camera, and you have to shoot a very important shot, which you may never be able to go back to this position, and try your best to make sure this shot comes out a successful one. And I'm sure he must have spent a lot of money and time to learn how to take these shots. Again, this takes us back to the time where he was always concerned about knowing the technology of the camera, knowing how the camera works, how the light and shadow works. Mind you, at the time there was no soundtrack. These films were all taken without sound, because the cameras which were in the market, who used to have sound added to the film, were very bulky, very awkward, and required one or two or maybe three people to handle and operate these things. And they were impractical to take around on a tour, for instance.
And he was the only one doing the whole thing, so he cannot do.
Exactly.
I mean, he cannot hire a lot of people to do. But now let's talk about the second shot. I mean, after the burying of the late Amir of Kuwait, Sheikh Abdul Jabir, what happened later on in the film?
Of course, lots of events were happening. Soon after that, Sheikh Abdullah al-Salim, His Highness the Amir, the late Amir of Kuwait, he came back to Kuwait. He was out of the country, and he came by sea. So he actually went with the boat that went there to receive him, and
welcoming delegation
that went to the sea, to the Kuwait, to the ship that brought His Highness the Amir, and moved with him until he came to shore and the port, and later on the different events of Kuwait, where his inauguration ceremony was set at Safat. He was there to again shoot these films personally in color, and the whole event was recorded, and it became a very interesting, let's say, project for him at the time. But later on, when he accumulated a library of different shots, that led him to think of putting it all together in a film which we are talking about right now. And he called it Kuwait, yesterday and today.
And he filmed also the sea life in those days and the old houses, muddy houses of Kuwait in those days.
Yes.
Also in Kuwait in old days we had a lot of festivals, happy ones. And Kuwait, especially in Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha, they used to go outside. Any effects of those in the film of your late father?
Yes.
But beside doing this, I mean, the most important thing in filming, because this is my job, so I know it, is editing.
Exactly.
So in those days, it was not like videotapes like nowadays.
Yes.
So how he would edit those tapes? I mean, he has to come manually in and collect them and tape them back in.
Exactly. You know, there was this manual editing machine with a small screen. It's about maybe 4 centimeters square.
And 2 rails here.
And 2 rails left and right, and manually he would move the film back and forth and select the shots which he wanted. Sometimes that was kind of slow and awkward to him, so he'd use his eye with a little lens in his hand. He would hold the film in the light, for instance, and hold the lens between the film and his eye and check the scenes which he wanted, cut them, put them aside in sequence, and then he had the editing small tools with the cement in it, and he knew exactly how to do this. And he edited all his films personally. I believe the amount of footage which we have right now, adding to it some maybe 10 or 5% wastage, I think we have something like 40 kilometers of film.
But that was a collection of almost 40 years.
20 years,
20 years.
25 years.
20.
That would be something like the vicinity of 100 and 120 hours of film he did in his lifetime. That wasn't all about Kuwait, of course. He used to travel around the world. He made a film called Around the World in 90 Days. He made a complete circle around the world, and he took films and pictures of the different countries and places he visited. This was in the, again, early 60s where he did that. He took, for instance, films of Soviet Union. That's where he learned the Russian language, tried as much as possible to learn. And for many years thereafter, he remembered many of the places, the names of the streets, the localities, the locations in Russian. He has a fantastic memory also, which was a God-given gift to him. He took films, for instance, of the southern part of Europe, Spanish and North Africa, and he called it the Andalusia area. These are in the old ages of expansion of Islam to these places. So he was following where history was. He used to go there and take films and make his own documentary, whereby he not only did the editing, he actually prepared the narrative and commentary material for it, both in Arabic and English.
He commentated on those tapes?
He commentated on it personally in both languages. He also prepared the background music for these. If it was Arabic, he used the Arabic music, and it was European or international, he'd use the well-known music.
And he also wrote the script for the...
He wrote the script. And
so he also was a script writer. We forgot to mention
exactly. He was everything except, let's say, the development. We used to help him as his children, sometime to synchronize between the sound and the film while it was being recorded. You can imagine, he had to first record the music and match it. He used to play for instance, the tape. First he starts with the phonograph. We do the selection. We select the scenes, and then from the phonograph we would tape it on a magnetic tape that would be synchronized with the film. Then he would make the commentary without the sound on another tape, both languages, Arabic and English, and then he would synchronize all of these on a third tape which had the sound and the commentary all synchronized with the cinema. So every time he had a showing, he had the tape recorder and the cinema, and we start them both together at the same time. So people would view sound and picture at the same time.
So that's why you yourself into movie business.
Exactly. It rubs on, as they say. Yes, we enjoyed it, we liked it. At the time while you're doing it, it's a very tedious job, very boring job, but you can imagine you had to say hours and hours and days putting these films together. And the interesting part was that every time he went on a trip, he would come back, make a film about that trip, and then invite his friends, dignitaries, and give them a night showing where he'd show them these films and also give them a dinner, and it was a nice gathering.
I remember my father in 1973 when he invited him to this house, and he has a theatre that he wanted to show his film also. Now, since we are in his house, there is this picture behind you,
Yes.
and there is a lot of history and story behind this. Can you tell us about this?
Yes, the fact that he liked art, and he was very much interested in the French style of arts and artifacts. He became interested in photographs and paintings and so forth. So one of the ladies who passed away, her name was Renee Casper, was a friend who used to come here and enjoy and talk about art.
She was French, actually.
Yes, she was French, and she knew him before he passed away. After he passed away, she came to Kuwait, and she realized that he was no longer with us. She herself was an artist and a painter. She did a lot of portraits of dignitaries and well-known people. So we said we'd like to make a portrait of him. Surprisingly, he had everybody on film except himself. Rarely you find a film where he himself is involved in it. So we had very limited pictures of him. So we had to create actually a picture for him. She was so talented that we actually used 3 or 4 pictures. And we used one of the chairs that are in this place, in this hall.
Like the one you're sitting on.
Like the one I'm sitting on, exactly. And we had one of my brothers whose physique looks very close to my father sit on this chair, and we create like the shadow of his seating. And she actually created the picture from all these different items, let's say, put together. And then after she did the first touches of the picture, that she came here and spent 1 month with us, and we all sat together and sort of created the picture in terms of how much looked like him, the color, the setting, and so forth and so on. You will see in this picture 2 items. One is on his back. On the back side, there's a small table with 2 reels of film on it that represents his hobby, and the other one, a book in his hand, which he was very much interested in reading books and literature and sciences.
Mr. Jاسم محمد قبازرد, at the end of this interview, I would like to thank you and thank your family for reviving the heritage of movie taking here in Kuwait. And also I ask God the Almighty to send peace to your late father, Muhammad Qubazard.
I'd like to thank you and thank Kuwait Television for being so kind and caring to share these moments with us and to show the heritage of Kuwait, which was recorded by my late father, which I believe is something that belongs to Kuwait. It should not be kept in a place. And we are doing our best to show as much as we can from this footage to you and to the public and to our dear viewers on Kuwait Television. So thank you again, and may God bless everybody. Thank you.
This is one of the many cameras used by the late Mr. Muhammad Qubazard to document an era of Kuwait's history. Our dear viewers, thank you for joining us. Until I see you again, good night.